All right, well, I won't waste any time. We've got 15 minutes, and thank you to CALRC and for having me and for all of you to be here today. When CALRC offered me a spot, they said, what do you want to talk about? And I said, what would you like me to talk about? And they came up with the topic, how to approach property owners on community-driven brownfield projects. And I'm here today to share my experience with you. I've been doing brownfield grant projects for 20 years, and it's taken me to communities in 40 states and all 10 EPA regions. And one of the biggest questions I get, and I had this question earlier today, we've got this nuisance property owner. He acquired these properties for $1. He thinks they're now worth $8 million. How can we motivate this guy to participate in our brownfield program? So over 20 years of working in communities, using these grants in a bunch of different ways. I'm here to share my experience with you on what I've seen work, for working with property owners and some of the pitfalls that I've seen along the way. Yes. Oh, there we go. So why is community engagement important to start off with? When communities are setting up programs to tackle their brownfield issues, it's important to get a diverse range of stakeholder input regarding the community needs and opportunities, their goals and objectives, which neighborhoods in the community would make priority target areas, and what are some of the types of sites. Additionally, community input is very important on establishing reuse plans and strategies. And then for the communities themselves, they have to make a commitment in finding funding to support their brownfield programs, developing incentive packages to attract private investment, and then making a host of capital improvements that are needed to service new properties and to support redevelopment. So stakeholder engagement is very central to community-driven brownfield projects. I'll go that way. There are a bunch of different perspectives and stakeholders involved in when you're doing community brownfield projects. I've got some of them listed here. Each of them are going to benefit from being approached in certain ways and strategies, and as a consultant or as a community, there are different priorities and concerns that you need to be aware of for all of the stakeholders involved. But central to all of those are property owners, because without a commitment from property owners, projects won't move forward, even though they seem like some of the best ones to focus on. Okay, sorry for the slide issues there. So elements of successful property owner engagement. These are three that I think are very important. Voluntary participation. So back 20 years ago when I started doing brownfield projects, I was working in Indiana, and I was working in some communities that had gone through a lot of economic downturn, had 10-acre sites that were blighted, contaminated, they were in tax delinquency, and the municipalities were really in a pinch, and they used it as an enforcement tool. Basically, they had the brownfield grants, and they went about using them to do environmental site assessments, do brownfield inventories, without a lot of participation from the actual property owners themselves, and that's very rare. So when communities ask me, should we be using this as an enforcement tool, my experience is no, that this should be a voluntary program where you're getting participation from stakeholders in the community that are interested in participating in your program, and then you're developing relationships with them to fuel public-private partnerships that are going to deliver transformational results. So property elements there to cover those are voluntary versus a situation where you're actually in a controversial relationship with the owner. So successful brownfield projects have two requirements there: motivated and engaged property owners and feasible cleanup and reuse plans. So if you're missing either of those, the path towards actually accomplishing redevelopment is going to be a long and winding road. So another way of putting it is avoid focusing on challenging sites with unengaged stakeholders and a lack of feasible cleanup and reuse plans. Okay, pitfalls to avoid for site prioritization. I've got some of them up here. As environmental consultants, oftentimes we're drawn to sites that have challenging environmental conditions and a lot of need for assessment and remediation, and that can be a real pitfall is, hey, this is the most contaminated site in our community, why don't we focus on that, you know? Whereas the goals of community-driven brownfield projects are accomplishing near-term redevelopment that's gonna result in jobs and tax-based revenue, provide green space, and so it can be a big pitfall into just focusing on your dirtiest sites that have the most challenges. Once again, utilizing funding as an enforcement tool should be avoided. Avoid arm twisting property owners and stakeholders to participate in your program. Work by attraction rather than promotion. Find folks that have projects that are moving forward and see how you can support their projects. The best way to generate early success stories is to hop on a project that already has significant momentum and provide the resources and funding support to help move it forward. And then obviously, focusing on projects with risk that far outweighs the reward should be avoided. Best practices for property owner engagement, feasible cleanup, reuse plans, and strategies. So yeah, earlier today I had that interview about the troublesome property owner who thinks that their property is worth $7 million more than they paid for it a few months ago. You know, what do we do there? We bring together an interested property purchaser, an interested property developer, you know, and we figure out, you know, what the true value of the property is and how we can find incentives to clean it up, find incentives to help redevelop it, and, you know, work as a public-private partnership to move it forward. Another best practice is leveraging momentum. I think I've mentioned it, you know, in the last few slides that the first thing I do with a new community who's going through the process for developing a brownfield program funded by these grants is to identify some easy early success stories. You know, some properties that have been through the permitting process, you know, have engaged, you know, people that are interested in purchasing the sites, redeveloping the sites, and then tagging onto that project and providing some support through the Brownfield grant, generating a success story that'll encourage other folks in the community to come to the table and want to participate in the program. Another one is providing incentives. There's a lot of incentives that communities can provide in the way of Brownfield grants. You know, we can offset their costs for cleanup or environmental site assessments and cleanup planning, reuse planning, but then on the development side, there's a whole host of facade improvements and you know, tax incentives, you know, so one of the best practices is for communities to have a menu of these types of incentives to bring forward and to attract people to participate in their program. One of the biggest pitfalls to you know, going forward with a brownfield project is having you know, unrealistic and inaccurate costs and schedules for what it's going to take to move through the assessment and cleanup process. So another best practice is to be realistic, build in factors of safety, build in contingencies and alternatives, but at all times be realistic. And then also very important is fully informing the property owners of what the pros and cons are of participating in the program. What are their risks if they take on a phase 1 environmental site assessment? What will be the risks if they move forward to a phase 2 and there's documented contamination, you know? Having a plan for those situations so that you're not just encouraging them to blindly get involved in a process that could lead them to liabilities right there. So I just saw my 5-minute sign flash up, and I am going to stop there. I appreciate the opportunity to get in front of you guys today on this topic, and if you want to have any more conversation about this, you can find me at our booth in the atrium or via email. So appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Because we have 10 minutes until the next time. If you
Okay.
Are there any questions? Chris, has anything surprised you when interacting with property owners to even begin this process?
Boy, so many things, you know. I've been surprised doing inventories. I've been surprised. We've had police escorts on the sites, and I've surprised some people that didn't, were surprised to see me and weren't too happy about it. So I guess, you know, it's hard to say surprised, but there's just a wide variety of perspectives, and you have to really get into the head of that person, you know, understand what their concerns are, understand what their motivations are, and be honest with them, you know, and see if there's a fit, you know, to supporting them and moving things forward. So, yeah.
Awesome. One more question, Chris, if you don't mind. Just because you mentioned this and it was interesting to me, why don't you recommend people include sort of the delinquent properties when looking at brownfield inventory, or sort of what to do next? Any things that you've personally seen?
Well, I'm interested in helping people build like long-term sustainable programs, okay? And if you get hung up on your most challenging sites, you know, your ones that have a 10-year, 15-year process towards cleanup and redevelopment, you know, and they're the biggest long shots, you know, you could get stuck on those for a while. Whereas if you focus on projects that have momentum and really can actually be benefited by a small amount of grant funding, you know, those will be the ones that generate success stories, result in cleaned up acres, you know, jobs, other benefits, and then you can turn around to the agency and say, hey, I met the outcomes of our grant, you know, give me another one. So there is a time and a place to carve out some things for your, you know, bigger sites and your more stretch assignments, but in general, it's better to start small, build momentum, and then learn along the way.
Totally. No, even in the ECRG, we've seen sometimes properties with like, you know, delinquent tenants and stuff, and those can just get delayed in the court for years with no work happening. So definitely see the value in trying to find you know, those win-win scenarios. Any more questions before we close? Awesome. If you don't mind introducing yourself and standing up too.
Hi everyone, James Nguyen, City of Parsons. So how do you get started to talk to property owners where you have no relationships with? How would you recommend your client or a grantee to do that? With sending out letters, cold letters, flyers, how do you start that process?
I personally like to put my thoughts down on paper. You know, I like to prepare and give somebody a chance to know where I'm coming from before I show up or call them, you know, out of the blue and expect them to be able to process what I'm offering, you know. So that's a personal preference for me, is to, in this world, you know, find their email address, you know, put it down on paper, and then suggest that we meet, you know, either over the phone or teleconference or in person if it's in Carson, and you can drive down the street. But that's the way I like to go best. I do think it's foolish to just approach somebody and, you know, say, hey, we know you've got some environmental things. It's pretty obvious from the street that, you know, you're going to need some assessment and cleanup funding without an actual project in mind, you know. So that's the crux of the thing, is there's got to be something in it for them, and they got to feel like you're coming at them with a sincere, you know, interest in benefiting the community, and that they hold the keys to potentially an important site, and you know, you'll help them along the way. Wrap up. Okay, well, thank you, folks. I appreciate the opportunity once again, and it's my first time doing 15 minutes, and I thought, heck, I'm going to have to talk for 45 and get cut off, but looks like it worked out fine, so thank you.
Awesome.